Well, welcome to Chapter 6, and in Chapter 6 we're going to learn about the nominative and the accusative cases, and we're going to take a look at the definite article. So it's a pretty long chapter. In fact, I think it's the longest chapter there is in the entire textbook, but when it gets right down to it, there's not a whole lot to memorize, so be encouraged on that part. Let's start with the whole issue of case endings. What's a case ending? Well, a case ending is a suffix that's added to the end of the Greek noun. And that becomes a very important indicator as to how that particular noun is functioning in the sentence. For example, let's say if a word is the subject of a sentence, well, it has to be put into the Greek equivalent of the subjective case. Well, how does it do that? Well, it puts a case ending onto the end of it. And so, for example, in the word apostolos, the basic part of the word is apostola, ending in the omicron. And so you put a sigma on the end to indicate that this word is functioning as the subject of the verb. And by putting that case ending on, the nominative case ending on, we say that that word is in the nominative case. Okay? If a word is functioning as a direct object of a verb, it goes into what in English is called the objective case. Well, how do you put a Greek word into the objective case? Well, you put a case ending onto the end of it. So, for example, nu could be a case ending to indicate that a word is functioning as a direct object. So the point is that Greek doesn't use word order. See, in English we use word order, don't we? If the word is going to be the subject of a verb, we put it before the verb. If the word is going to be the direct object of the verb, we put it after the verb. English uses word order a lot. Well, Greek doesn't. Greek uses these case endings. And what that is going to mean is that a lot of Greek words, in terms of word order in a sentence, can be all over the place. At least it'll feel like they're all over the place. They're not really. But they don't have to put the subject before the verb. They don't have to put the direct object after the verb. Why? Because it's an inflected language. And in an inflected language, we put these case endings, these little suffixes, onto the end of the word. And it's the suffix that tells you, oh, this is functioning as the subject of the verb. Oh, this word is functioning as a direct object of the verb. So case endings are those little ending suffixes we put on nouns, the Greeks put on nouns, to indicate how that word is functioning in the sentence. So it becomes very important to understand the forces that control what case ending is actually used on any individual word. So let's look at that. Well, first of all, start with the concept of what's called a stem. What's a stem? The stem of the word is the most basic fundamental form of the word. Let's say you memorize the word logos. Okay, if you drop that sigma off, you end up with laga. Okay, that's the stem of the noun. That's its most basic form. And when I give you the stem of the word in BBG, I put an asterisk in front of it. That's just my own little way of doing things. But it's the way of saying, okay, this is the stem of the word. So you have this word in Greek, logos. Its stem is laga. And that basic laga means word, statement, reason, something along those lines. So then we get into the whole issue of declensions. And I started with stem because what declension a word follows is determined by that final letter in the actual stem. Now, several chapters back, I talked about declensions. I just said they are patterns of inflection. And I used the example in English of singulars and plurals. There are some words that form their singular with S. There are some words that form their plural with S. There's some words that form their plural by changing a vowel inside the word, that kind of thing. A declension is just a pattern of inflection. And let me emphasize up front, what declension a word is in has no relationship to its meaning at all. The declension only affects its form. You'll see why that's so important in just a second. So here's the basic rule. If the stem of a word ends in an alpha or an eta, we call it first declension. In other words, those words are first declension words. And that means they're going to all follow the same basic inflectional pattern as you go through the different cases. So you have a word like hora. What's the word that means hour? It ends in an alpha. That tells you it's first declension. Or you have the word graphe. It ends in an eta. Graphe and hora, both together, are first declension words. But let's say you have the stem apostolos. It ends in omicron sigma. Well, that's second declension. The second declension are stems whose last letter of the stem ends in an omicron. And so you get words like apostolos or ergon. You drop off the sigma and the nu, which are case endings. If you haven't figured that out by now, you probably have. And you have these stems that end in omicron. Okay, that means there's second declension. The only other option are stems that end in a consonant. And this is in chapter 10, and we won't get to it for a bit. But I just wanted to mention that up front. So you have three declensions, and the first declension is stems ending in alpha or eta, and so they all follow the same basic inflectional pattern. They're going to use somewhat the same case endings. Stems ending in an omicron are second declension, and they will follow their own little set of endings. And then stems ending in a consonant are third declension, and they will follow their own inflectional pattern. Now, I guess in a sense there's a fourth declension. It's not really a declension. It's called the indeclinables. Indeclinable words are words generally that are brought over from another language that don't change their form. So there are indeclinables, but for the most part there are three declensions. And what declension a stem is in will determine to some degree what the case endings look like. Okay. Now there are other forces that control what case endings get attached to a noun. One is gender. Now, for example, you can have masculine nouns, you can have feminine nouns, and you can have neuter nouns. And masculine nouns tend to have somewhat the same case endings. Feminine nouns tend to have somewhat the case endings. You get the idea. Now, in the case of nouns, a word is only one gender. You don't have Greek nouns that are multiple genders. But so you'll learn a word like logos, and you're going to learn that it's a second declension, and it happens to be masculine. Okay. And as we said in an earlier chapter, Greek doesn't follow natural gender for the most part. The word hamartia is the word for sin. It's feminine, but it doesn't mean that sin is a feminine trait. Hamartolos, omicron sigma, second declension, that means sinner. It's masculine. Doesn't mean that men are sinners. Well, we could get into that discussion, but I won't. But all that to say is that whatever declension a word follows is not based so much on its meaning, but on its final stem vowel. Now, having said that, though, there are certain patterns. For example, when you learn a vocabulary word that ends in os, like logos, it's going to be a masculine word. If it's a feminine word, it ends in alpha or eta, it's probably going to be feminine, feminine first declension. So there are certain patterns. If you have a word that ends in on, like ergon, the omicron tells you it's a second declension. The nu tells you it's neuter. So there are some patterns. But for the most part, the gender that a Greek noun follows doesn't have any relationship to meaning. Okay. But gender can affect what case endings are used. The other thing that can affect case endings is number. In English, again, we add an S or do other things to form a plural. What you do in Greek is you have a totally different set of case endings. For example, if you have the word apostolos, okay, that means apostle. And that's the case ending that is used if the word is functioning as a subject of the verb. Apostolos, the sigma is the case ending. But let's say it's apostles, plural, and you want it to be the subject. What you do is that you change the sigma, in this case, to an iota, and you get apostoloi. Okay? You change the case ending to indicate that it's not singular, but that it's plural. Okay, so those are the factors that affect what case endings we use. The stem, the declension, the gender, and the number. Okay? All right. Well, in this chapter, we're going to learn two different cases. We're going to learn the nominative and the accusative case. We learn the next two in the next chapter. Let's start with the nominative. The nominative case in Greek is the same thing, basically, as the subjective case is in English. In other words, if a word is functioning as a subject of the verb, in English we say it's in the subjective case. In Greek, we say it's in the nominative case. Now, how do you put a word into the nominative case? Right. You add nominative case endings to it. So if you have a word like theos, that sigma is the case ending that's used in with this particular word. And so, let me explain it two different ways. If you're a translator, what you're doing is you're looking for nominative case endings. You come across the form theos, you recognize that the sigma is the nominative case ending. You go, oh, it's a nominative case ending. Theos is functioning as the subject of the verb because it's in the nominative case. Now, the speaker did it just the opposite. The speaker comes along and he says, okay, I want to use theos, it's the Greek word for God, and I want to use it as the subject of the verb, so I have to put it into the nominative case. How do I put it in the nominative case? Oh, I add the appropriate nominative case ending, sigma, and I have the form theos. So that's two different ways to explain the same thing. But anyway, the nominative case in Greek is the case that you put a word into when it's functioning as the subject of a verb. You put it into the nominative case by putting nominative case endings on it. So what we do in translation is we look for nominative case endings. We know that that word's in the nominative case, and therefore we know it's functioning as the subject of the verb. Okay, get that? All right. The other case is kind of the flip side. It's the accusative case. The accusative case is roughly the same thing as the English objective case. And in Greek, we use the accusative case when something is functioning as the direct object of a verb. So if you have the form kosmon, okay, the nu is an accusative case ending. So again, for a translator, we're looking for the direct object of a verb. That means we're looking for something in the accusative case, which means we're looking for an accusative case ending. So we see kosmon, we go, oh, the nu is an accusative case ending. That makes it in the accusative case, therefore it's functioning, as far as we know now, as the direct object of the verb. The speaker does just the opposite. He or she says, okay, I want to make this word the direct object of the verb. I've got to put it, therefore, into the accusative case. What's the appropriative case ending? Oh, in this case, it's nu, so he says kosmon. Okay, see how that works? So those are the two cases, the nominative and the accusative case. Now, I've hinted at this. Well, maybe actually I've said it, but let me be real clear. One of the challenges that you're going to have is this whole issue of word order. If you are a native English speaker, you are just going to be so used to saying the subject is the word that comes in front of the verb and the direct object is the word that comes at the end, after the verb. And you've got to break free from that and get out of that mindset. Because Greeks can put the subjects almost anywhere they want in a sentence. They can put the direct objects almost anywhere they want in the sentence. Because the word order isn't what determines the function of the words. It's the case ending. So if you had a sentence like theos agapa ton kosmon, the theos, that's a nominative case ending, so it's a subject. Kosmon, it's got an accusative case ending, so you know that theos is the subject, God. Agapa loves ton kosmon, the world. Okay, but you could also say ton kosmon agapa theos. In other words, you could put the direct object first, and you could put the subject afterwards. There would be a reason for doing that in Greek, but at this point, it's safe to say they're basically the same meaning. So you can't rely on word order. You can only rely on case endings. So you got to really concentrate to not think about if the word before the verb is the subject. That's not the way it works. It's the word that has the nominative case ending, that's the subject. It's the word that has the accusative case ending, that's the direct object. Now, having said that, as you're translating your Greek sentence, basically try to follow Greek word order if it makes sense. I mean, just try to keep things in the same order in English that you see in Greek. There'll be times when you can't do that, and then you're going to have to move things around. But again, it's case endings, not word order, that's so important. Okay, good. Okay, other odds and ends that we need to learn, and then the definite article, of course. Let's talk about the word lexicon. A lexicon is just a fancy word for a dictionary. I don't know why we call dictionaries lexicons, but we do. So anyway, a lexicon is a dictionary. the lexical form of a word is the form of the word in the dictionary. In other words, because Greek words change their form, depending on what case they're in and what gender they're in and what number they're in, not gender yet, the actual forms are going to be different. But there needs to be one form that you would look up in a dictionary under. And so that's called the lexical form. The vocabulary that you have been learning and will learn, those are all the lexical forms of the nouns. Okay, so lexicons are the dictionary. A lexical form is the form that the word is listed under in the dictionary. And it is the lexical form that you've been memorizing in your vocabulary. Now, it just so happens in nouns, the lexical form is the nominative singular form of the word. So when you're looking at the lexical form, when you're looking at the vocabulary form, what you're looking at is the nominative singular. It's really important because imagine you come across a word like apostoloi, and it's an omicron iota. If you look up apostoloi in the lexicon, you're not going to find anything. But you look at apostoloi, you see the iota, you go, oh, that's a nominative plural case ending. What's the lexical form of this word? Oh, it's apostolos with a sigma. Oh, that's the form I need to look up in the dictionary. So much for lexicons. Now, that's a lot, isn't it? Well, there's a review section, a halftime review in your book, and you may want to stop and to look over it and to review it. But we're about halfway through the chapter, the hardest half of the chapter. Okay, let's move on to paradigms. Let me say something about a paradigm, several things about paradigms first. I don't place a lot of weight on memorizing a lot of paradigms. In fact, one of the things that I try to do in BBG is reduce memorization to an absolute minimum. When I learned Greek, there were just unbelievable number of paradigms that I had to memorize. But that means there's an unbelievable number of paradigms I have to keep reviewing. And I don't know where you're headed in ministry, whether you're headed into the pastorate or you're doing this just for the fun of it or whatever be the case. There's going to be time constraints on you, and you're not going to, for most people, you're not going to have the time to memorize and to review and to rememorize these paradigms over and over and over again. So my method of teaching Greek really tries to reduce the amount of memory work, and that means I try to cut down the number of paradigms you have to learn. Now, the flip side of that, though, is that if I ask you to memorize a paradigm, it's just absolutely crucial. You have to memorize. You have to memorize it exactly. You have to memorize it precisely. So I need to know that you're really taking these paradigms seriously. And you need to know that I've tried to reduce the number as far as possible. Okay? So let's get on to paradigms. Here's a paradigm. This is a basic layout. And let me explain some things on the paradigm first. There are columns and rows. And you notice along the top there's 2, 1, 2, and then masc, fem, and neut. All right. The 2 means that this column follows second declension. The 1 means that that column follows the first declension, and the 2 means the third column follows a second declension also. Underneath that, it tells you that the first column is second declension masculine, the next column is first declension feminine, and the final column is second declension neuter. And then down the side is pretty obvious. It's nominative singular, accusative singular, nominative plural, accusative plural. My recommendation on these paradigms is to memorize them left to right. Your teacher may have a different way of doing it, but when I'm looking at a Greek sentence, I'm trying to translate it, I'm looking for a subject. And I don't really care whether it's first, second, or third declension. I don't care what gender it is. I don't care whether it's singular or plural. I want to find the nominative. And so I'd encourage you to memorize left to right, os, a, on kind of memorization in this particular paradigm. I would have put the plural to the right of the singular, but there's just not enough room on the page, and so I had to break it in half. So let's look at these forms. These are, and what I'm doing here on this illustration on the video is that I've combined 2 of the paradigms that are in the textbook. Look just at the yellow initially. What is the nominative singular case ending for a second masculine word like logos? Well, you can see it in the yellow, can't you? It's sigma. What is the nominative singular case ending for a first declension feminine word like graphe or hora? Well, in the paradigm of the book, you see that there's a dash there, meaning there is none. And what that means is that the stem stands all by itself. There is no case ending. And so you get graphe and you get hora with an alpha. How do you form a nominative singular, second declension neuter like ergon? Well, the case ending is a nu. All right, so you see how the paradigm works? In the accusative singular, the true case endings are nu, 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 nu. That's pretty easy, isn't it? If you see a nu, pretty good chance you're an accusative singular. You go into the nominative plural. In other words, if you have a subject that's going to be the subject of a verb, if you have a word that's going to be the subject of a verb, and it's plural, the endings are iota and iota if it's a second or first declension word, and it's an alpha if it's a second declension neuter. Now you notice in the book the alpha is underlined. That means that the alpha, which is the case ending, has swallowed up that final omicron on the stem. Go to the accusative plural, and your case endings are upsilon sigma, and then the alpha again in the neuter. All right, this is your first set of case endings, and you need to memorize them and memorize them exactly and precisely. Now, one of the things that I do that's a little different from other textbooks is that I encourage you to memorize the true case endings. When I was learning Greek, I was taught that the endings were, if you go vertically, they're os, on, oi, us. And for some people, it's easier to memorize case endings with that initial vowel. But even if it is for you, please learn what the true case endings are, the ones that are in yellow. I think it's absolutely crucial. And the reason is, as we get into other first and second declension patterns, and especially when we get into the third declension, this can be really confusing if you think that the nominative singular case ending is os. But if you know the nominative singular case ending is sigma, then these other forms are so much easier to memorize. So be sure you know what the true case endings are, the ones that are in yellow on the video paradigm, and then they're separated out in the textbook. Please learn the true case endings really, really well. Now, there's a couple of other things in this chart that I think there's some patterns that are worth noticing. Go over to the second declension neuter column. You see the pattern? Take a look at it. Okay, the pattern is that the nominative and accusative are identical in the singular, and the nominative and accusative are identical in the plural. This is always true. It's not that hard. I mean, in sense, it doesn't get tricky. It's the question is this word the subject or is it a direct object? It's really not that hard when you see these words in context, so don't let it freak you out. It won't get you in trouble. But notice that is a pattern. Okay, let me point one other thing out here. Let's say you have a word and the final letter of that noun is sigma. What is it? Well, what could it be? Well, if you look at the chart, if it's omicron sigma, it's nominative singular, which means it could be the subject. But if it's an alpha sigma, it's an accusative plural, and it could be the direct object. How do you know whether that word that ends in sigma is the subject or the direct object of the verb? It's the stem, isn't it? See, if it's a second declension word, in other words, the stem ends in an omicron, that can only be the subject, can only be a nominative. But if the vowel before the sigma is an alpha, then it has to be a first declension, which means it can only be an accusative plural. See how it works? Case endings it's a bit like being Sherlock Holmes. You've got to look at the clues and piece things together. And sometimes you'll see something like the us, omicron, upsilon, sigma, and you go, it's accusative plural. That's not hard. I know right away what that is. But there'll be other times when you see a sigma or a nu that you're going to have to go looking for other parts of the Greek word to get some clues out of. So anyway, this is your initial run at case endings. Now, if you look at the next paradigm in the book, you're going to see the case endings with the final stem vowel on the stems. And again, this gives you a little better feel for what it's going to look like in real life. So logos is a singular subject, logon is a singular direct object, Logoi is a plural subject. Logus is a plural direct object. See how it works? All right. Now, there's something in the feminine that I need to point out. You'll look at graphe, graphane, and then hora, horon. They're exactly the same, aren't they? Except that the final stem vowel is an alpha or an eta. But you can see it's the same thing going on in terms of case endings, don't you? Look what happens to these words when they get into the plural. The eta stem vowel changes to an alpha, all right? So you get graphi, alpha iota, and you get hori, alpha iota. This is what Greek does. Sorry about that. Nobody asked my opinion when they formed the language. That's just what it does. So in the singular, you can have the alpha or eta final stem vowel. In the plural, it always switches to an alpha. Okay? Okay, now we meet a concept called parsing. And your teacher is going to ask you many times, and I will also, to parse a word. And what we're asking you to do is break the word down and tell me what you know. What are the things that you know about this word? And so for nouns, you tell us 5 different things. You're going to tell us case, number, gender, lexical form, and inflected meaning. Now, here's what I mean by that. Let's say you have a word lagus, all right? Parse it for me. Well, you see the upsilon sigma, you know right away what it is, don't you? It is an accusative, plural, and then you think back and you go, this is in that first column. Those are masculine words, so you know the gender is masculine. You also know it's masculine because how you memorized it. Remember when you started memorizing vocabulary and there was these letters after the word, you didn't know what they were? Well, now you do know what they are. At least one of them is. When you learned logos, you memorized it as logos and then dash omicron upsilon. That's next chapter. And then you saw ha. The ha, the omicron with the rough breathing, is the masculine form of the definite article. So logos, ha, is my way of you learning that logos is a masculine word. So what you do back in this parsing, when you see logus, you can see that it's accusative plural, and in your mind you're going, what's the lexical form? It's logos. How did I memorize logos? Oh, I memorized it with ha. Oh, it's masculine. So logus is an accusative plural masculine. All right? And then the next thing you want to tell the teacher is what's the lexical form? Well, that's logos. And then you want to tell the inflected meaning. And here's what I mean by inflected meaning. If the form that you're parsing has a slightly different meaning because it's plural or because of other things that can change its meaning, you need to tell the teacher that you understand that. You want your teacher to know that you're getting it. So when you look at logus, it's plural. So if you saw logus in a sentence, you would translate it as words, plural. So the inflected meaning is look at what this word would mean in context and try to convey that as much as possible. Now, for example, if this was a singular form, you had logos or logon, the inflected meaning for both cases would be word, singular. But because this is plural, the inflected meaning can be words. Okay? All right, good. Now let's take a slightly different word because this is a special case. You have erga. Okay, the lexical form for this is ergon. It's a second declension neuter word. It means work. The alpha, you know, can be a nominative or accusative plural. Here's why this is important, though. If you saw erga and just assumed that it was the subject, you could imagine there'd be some problems involved in that, wouldn't it? Yeah. What if it was a direct object and you assume it's the subject and everything's all messed up? So in the case of neuters, when it comes to a form that is nominative or accusative, I think it's important that you say it could be both. You just need to get into that habit of realizing that. So if you saw erga, you would parse it as a nominative or accusative, plural, neuter, from ergon, meaning works. Okay? So that's parsing. In my attempt to help reduce the amount of memorization you have to do, we've come to the 3 noun rules. And there's going to be 8 all told. But if you learn these 8 noun rules, it's amazing how much memory work they get rid of. You just don't have to learn them. So again, much better to learn 8 rules and go with that. Learn these things exactly, okay? I worked really hard to get the wording just right. And there's, in other chapters, you're going to see that there are things that I'm trying to point out with this particular wording. So memorize these things really carefully, okay? So the first of the noun rules you already know is that stems ending in an alpha or eta are in the first declension. Stems ending in omicron are in the second declension, and consonantal stems are in the third. Okay, that's the first of the noun rules. The second noun rule we've also seen as well, and that is that every neuter word has the same form in the nominative and in the accusative. So you have ergon or erga, you know that it could be either nominative or accusative. One of the nice things about this rule is it's always true. Always. It's really nice. It's one of those inviolable rules in Greek. So hang on to this for all you're worth. Okay, the third noun rule is a little more flexible, and that is that almost all neuter words end in alpha in the nominative and accusative plural. I debated on this rule, but it gets you out of a lot of trouble. So just remember that almost, not all, but almost all neuter words, regardless of their declension, by the way, in the nominative and accusative plural are going to end in an alpha. Moving on to the definite article. The definite article is the word the, basically. It's the word the in Greek. We talk in English about an indefinite article, which is the word a, and if it's followed by a word beginning with a vowel, we say an. Okay. There is no indefinite article in Greek. There's either the Greek article, and I tend to call it just the article and not the definite article. We have the article, and it's there or it's not there. Now, here's what I want to tell you about the article. The article is your friend. It's really important you understand this. The article is your friend. It's going to get you out of so many troubles. And the reason for it is because it's very consistent in its form. There's 24 forms altogether of the definite article, and you'll memorize them. You will memorize them. And once you know those, though, it's going to get you out of all kinds of trouble. So the article is your friend, and you want to really hook up with it. Now, here's why the article is your friend. The rule, it has to do with something called agreement. The article agrees with the noun it modifies in case, number, and gender. In other words, if you were going to say the word, what the Greeks would do is that they would know the form of the Greek word logos. They would know whether it's nominative or accusative. They would know whether it's singular or plural. They would know, in this case, that it's masculine, or if it were another noun, it'd be feminine or neuter. I mean, they know all those variables. And the article has to be in the same case. The article has to be in the same gender. The article has to be in the same number as the word it modifies. So, logos is nominative singular, but it doesn't really matter if there's a ha in front of it, because if there's a ha in front of it, you know that ha is nominative singular masculine, and therefore logos must be nominative singular masculine. So the article agrees with the noun it modifies. It's in the same case, the same gender, and the same number as the word that it modifies. So if you know your paradigm for the article really well, you're home free on this. So take a look at the paradigm for the article. And you can see where there are some case endings there attached to the stem of the word. When it comes to the article, it's just easier to memorize the whole thing. Okay, so again, the article, the nominative singular, in the masculine is ha, in the feminine it's he, in the neuter it's ta. Now you notice there's no nu on the end. This is one of the variation of second declension neuters. It's just ta. Okay, go to the accusative singular. The masculine is ton, the feminine is tain, And the neuter, again, same as with the nominative, it's ta. Oh, by the way, notice in the feminine there's no alpha, it's always eta. Okay. Go to the plural. Let's say you want to say the words. Well, the Greek word for the in that case is hoi. But if the word that it's modifying is feminine, it would have been hai. If the word that it was modifying was neuter, it would be ta. Okay, what if those plural words were in the direct object and were plural? The article would be tous, tas, ta. Okay? So that's the paradigm so far. It's half the forms of the article, and you have to memorize it, and you have to memorize it exactly. Now, a couple of hints on the article. Notice that the article always starts with a rough breathing mark or a tau. Okay, that's one clue that will help you with this form. Another thing is that, and this is kind of cool, the Greek article doesn't give a rip what declension the noun is that it's modifying. In other words, if it's going to modify a word, it doesn't care whether it's first, second, or third declension. It only cares about its gender. And so if you want to say the, and it's the subject of the sentence and it's singular, what the Greek speaker would do is they would look at the word and they wouldn't care about the declension. They'd say, is this word masculine, feminine, or neuter? That determines what form of the article that I'm going to use. So you can have ha with a first, second, or third declension word. Okay, if I beat that one to death enough, okay, all right. But that's really nice. The article doesn't care about the declension that a word's in. And finally, the lexical form for a definite article is the nominative singular masculine. And so you'll find the word in the lexicons discussed under the word ha. Okay, very good. We're getting near the end. Hang in there. Let's talk a bit about translation procedure. A couple things I want to share. One of the things that's going to be difficult pretty quickly is a long Greek sentence. Each chapter starts with a word and then a series of words, and then it goes to some phrases, and then it gets into the sentences. And some of those sentences can get kind of long, and when they get long, they get a little scary to some people. What you need to learn to do from day one is to divide a sentence up into its parts. For example, you should always divide a sentence into its subject or its predicate. So you take the noun and you find anything that's modifying it, and then you separate it out from the verb and anything that's going with that. And in fact, I would say separate out the verb from the direct object as well. So you take your sentences and you start looking for those major breaks. Where's the subject and its modifiers? Oh, okay, there, draw a line, separate it from the verb. There's the verb and its modifiers. Okay, separate it out. Okay, here's the direct object and what goes with it. Okay, separate it out. But separate out your sentences into their pieces, and it will really help. Next thing, how do you translate the article? I've hinted at this earlier, but let me say it again. Basically, translate the article if it's there in Greek. Don't say the if it's not there in Greek. So that's the basic rule. If ha or one of its form is there, try to say the. If the article is not there, do not say the. And if you want to put in a or an, you can. That's okay. That's the general rule. Now, what you're going to find pretty quickly, even in this chapter, is that the Greek article functions differently than the English definite article. And you're going to find the Greeks use the article in places we don't, and vice versa. For example, they tended to use, they do use the article with proper names. So Jesus' name is never just Iesus, it's Ha Iesus. Well, you don't say the Jesus, you say Jesus in English. So when you see an article used with a proper name, you can drop the translation of the article in English. Also, in abstract nouns, they tend to use the article. So we talk about, well, that is good. Well, they tend to say that is the good. So you can drop it in that case as well. Okay. Finally, in translation, it's the issue of postpositives. There are a few little words like de that are postpositive. What that means is that they cannot occur as the first word in a sentence. So they're put in the second, third, or sometimes the fourth place. But you will always translate them as the first word in the sentence. That's just how English works. So make sure you pay attention in the vocabulary sections for the postpositives, because they're going to be coming first. Okay, let me say just a couple things in closing. I made this comment, kind of offhanded once in Greek, and it was one of those things that has just really stuck. And I'll talk to students I had 20 years ago, and they'll still talk about the fog. Here's what's going to happen. Language takes a while to sink in. You just can't, oh, I'm going to learn it, and it's just there. It's like 2 + 2 is 4, and you know it. Languages don't take that, don't work that way. They take a time to sink in, and that's why I encourage you in an earlier chapter to study consistently every day. Well, the reason for that is when you learn, here we go through chapter 6, and you're going to kind of know, but it's going to be foggy. You're not going to feel real comfortable with it. All right? You need to know that's okay. All right? That's okay. It's okay to be in the fog. When you go to chapter 7, here's what's going to happen. You'll learn chapter 7. You look back at chapter 6, and it's not going to be as foggy because you will have been using the nominative and accusative in chapter 7. You'll be practicing in new ways, and it's okay. You're going to be, but it'll still be a little foggy. You're going to get to chapter 8, and for most people, it's 2 chapters. You're going to get to chapter 8, and you're going to be learning other stuff, and you're going to look back at chapter 6, and you go, "What was my problem? It's easy. Well, how come it's so easy? I remember being frustrated with it." Well, that's because you entered the fog in chapter 6, and it takes a couple of chapters to work its way out. If you don't believe me, what's 2 chapters back? Alphabet, pronunciation. Those are easy, aren't they? You're not struggling with that. Well, if you are, then you're in trouble, okay? Then the fog has got a lightning bolt in it or something, I don't know. But all that to say, with every chapter, you're moving further into the fog, but the fog's clearing behind you. All right, the fog is clearing, so hang in there. It's okay to learn chapter 7 and be a little foggy about it. Chapter 6 is getting clear, okay? So good deal. Finally, you need to look at the charts having to do with your vocabulary so far. When you learn the vocabulary in this chapter, you know 33% of all word occurrences, okay? So if you open up a Greek text right now and started scanning it, and once you've learned the vocabulary in this chapter, you're going to know one out of every 3 words in the book, in the whole Bible. Oh, 33%, that's really cool, isn't it? All right, so hang in there. You're getting a good start. But that's it for chapter 6.
Agape, agapes, hey. Love. Allas, alle, Allah. Other, another. Autos, aute, auta.
He, she, it, they.
Basileia, basileus, hey. Kingdom. De. But, and. En. In, on, among. Ergon, ergu, ta. Work, deed, action. Kairos, kairu, ha. Time, appointed time, season. Noon.
As an adverb, now. As a noun, the present.
Ha, he, ta. The. Hati. That, since, because. U. Not. Also pronounced ook and uch. Hora, Horus, hey. Hour, occasion, moment.